The spirit of enterprise is sparked by the sunrise industries of high tech and by small business people with big ideas. People like Barbara Proctor, who rose from a ghetto to build a multi-million-dollar advertising agency in Chicago. Carlos Perez, a Cuban refugee who turned $27 and a dream into a successfully importing business in Coral Gables, Florida. People like these are heroes for the 80s.
President Ronald Reagan, in his State of the Union address in 1984, in a sense doing my job this morning, because he mentioned the name of Carlos Perez, who joins us again. Carlos, we appreciate the time. It's good to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Also with us, Raul Mas, and of course the familiar face of Governor Mike Huckabee, fresh from the campaign trail and renewed and reinvigorated with all sorts of good observations. We're continuing Battleground, Florida from here at the Cafe Versailles. And Carlos Pena, we have gotten a sampling of opinion from a lot of different people this morning. I'm just interested how you think things are going to turn out Tuesday. You told me earlier you think Trump pretty much has a lot. Anybody say anything to change your mind? Have you heard from people here?
Well, I have heard a lot of opinion and so on and so on. But basically speaking, I think that this is a unique election in the history of this country. I have been 50-some years here in the state, and I haven't seen the forces that are driving the behavior of the electorate as in this occasion. It's unbelievable. And hate, anxiety, disbelief in the government, disbelief in the politicians. So those forces are driving the behavior of the electorate. And I think that Trump, in some way, somehow, has been able to get the opinion of the electorate. In my humble opinion, not because he's here, but in my humble opinion, two candidates of the Republican Party were going to be the success this year. Jeb Bush and Mike Huckabee. They are what they call natural. If you analyze the personality of every presidential candidate, you could see that the experience, that the common sense, and so on, experience are the determining factor. But in this occasion, those two were not, really the candidate. And here is the Trump phenomenon, that I call it a phenomenon, something unbelievable in American politics. But the guy has channelized, as I was telling you the other day, early in the morning, a rating is power. And to be in the hit parade constantly, those are two essence of Donald Trump. Plus the fact that he has been a success in business. And people on their knees, people want America to be great again. People want to be American to be a winning force. And those things are, in my humble opinion, what is driving the Trump phenomenon. Now, concerning here Florida, unless there is a miracle that will have tremendous amount of votes here in South Florida, I don't think that Marco Rubio will make it, because the Trump phenomenon is unbeatable. It's something that you cannot nationally. It's not only in Florida. It's in the whole country.
Let me turn to you, Mike, because you heard words of praise here from Carlos. I'm just kind of curious. You're in the miracle business.
I wasn't this year.
Well, yeah. Well, sometimes there are setbacks. But is it conceivable that Rubio could defy the pollsters, that there could be such a turnout in South Florida that he'd be able to win?
There certainly is always that opportunity. But let's keep in mind, a lot of people in Florida have already voted. I think we miss how much of the vote is early voting in Florida, and it's been underway now for, in many counties, 2 or 3 weeks. So he can't get those votes. You can't go back and unvote. I also think that the momentum, Ben Carson's endorsement, the fact that he has been nonstop in the eye, Trump is going to be a very difficult force to defeat. And one of the challenges Marco faces is that the perception, and look, one thing I do know, you know this, you've been a candidate. Once a perception has been cemented, and the press is real good at cementing a perception, he has not a chance. He can't win. It's not going to be. People just say, I don't want to vote for someone if it's not going to make any difference. And so that is working against Marco, and it's unfair. I'll tell you the most unfair thing that happened to Marco Rubio was the unsubstantiated rumors that went out saying that he was dropping out of the race before the primary. That made me angry for Marco because it's totally unfair. And I know that his campaign quickly pushed back, but look, the damage is done. And CNN and Fox Business both ran with that story. They should never have run with it, and I call them out, and I tell you this, if you run a story like that, you absolutely must name your source. Saying unnamed sources, high-placed people, that's nonsense, and I felt for Marco because I've been on the receiving end of that. In 2008, it was said that I had pulled out of Florida. I was in Florida at the very moment that happened, and all of our people in Florida, they gave up.
Well, the Washington Post ran the headline, Rubio campaign in meltdown. But you're saying these other organizations took it the extra mile, saying that, intimating that Rubio was going to get out.
They said that his advisors and his donors were telling him to get out before the primary so as not to be embarrassed by losing his home state, and that Marco was going to go ahead and drop out in advance. I'm just saying that that is a killing kind of story. And if a news organization is going to run that, I know that they're all about getting the news, then have the guts to name your source on something that will affect an election and affect a person's life.
One thing done out in public yesterday, you touched on it a second ago, Mike, and I want to get Raul's thoughts on it. Dr. Ben Carson stepping up to endorse Donald Trump. Your take on that,
Yeah,
Raul?
listen, I think a big surprise, but I think obviously there's some anger and hostility there towards Ted Cruz from what happened in Iowa. And I think, I also think Dr. Ben Carson's a very, very smart individual. I think he's reading the tea leaves, and I think he's decided to sort of throw his, cast his lot with Donald Trump. Listen, I think one thing that you both alluded to earlier, both Carlos and the governor, there is a revolution sort of taking place in America. And I think regardless of whether it's Donald Trump or Ted Cruz or whoever else it might be, for the Republican Party, that's a good thing. I mean, we really need to shake things up in this country. And I, just like the governor, I will support whoever the Republican candidate is. If that is Ted Cruz, if that is the will of the electorate, of the American people, boy, the American people are a very smart bunch. Don't ever underestimate them, okay? They know what they want. They've seen the candidates. There's been a fair election so far. And I think, if that's the candidate of the Republican Party, we should all, join the forces.
Mike, about 30 seconds. A revolution, but a peaceful one with ballots rather than bullets.
Yeah.
If this comes to fruition, do you have every confidence that Donald Trump will surround himself with people who can help him get the job done?
I absolutely do. And here's why. Because he is, at his heart, a business guy, an executive who has made his living by taking on big projects and being the front man, but delegating the details to people who manage those pieces of it. There's no doubt in my mind. I always say this, the most dangerous man in the room is the man who doesn't know what he doesn't know. That's the guy that scares me. Trump, for all of his bluster, he knows what he doesn't know, and he will delegate.
There are not dangerous people outside this room, but very capable people, including our colleague Miranda Kahn, who is outside Cafe Versailles. Miranda?
Hi, JD. Joining me now is Tony Valdez, and he's actually lived in Miami now since the 70s, but your family's originally from Cuba. And you said you come here to Cafe Versailles at least 2 or 3 times a week, and not just for the croquetas and the Cuban cafe, but also for the conversation, correct?
Well, I think it's very therapeutic. Any kind of a Cuban cafe, you could be depressed, you could be under the weather, but you come here and all of a sudden 10, 15 minutes later, you run into 10 or 15 people and you feel 100% better.
Yeah, you were telling me earlier, this is where everyone tries to solve the problems of the world, right?
Well, right behind you is that rock. That's where apparently people come congregate. They discuss Cuba, but probably all the problems of the world could be resolved right here because all the political wisdom is behind that coffee counter right there.
What's it like for you having 2 Cuban Americans running for president right now?
I think for me, it's just a little bit hard to digest at this point. I keep thinking of my father who passed away suddenly about 2.5 years ago, where it would have been thrilling for him, amazing. The 2 Cuban Americans are of the 4 final contenders for the Republican nomination of the president.
Who do you want for president?
Well, I was leaning towards Ted Cruz.
And why Ted Cruz?
I think that he and Marco Rubio, I think, have similar qualifications. Both senators, both attorneys. I like Marco Rubio. I just think that Ted Cruz just had a little bit more intellectual rigor and a little bit more prepared.
Do you think he has a chance here in Florida?
I don't think so. I really don't, unfortunately.
He's your guy. All right, Tony Valdez, thanks so much for joining us. All right, we're going to send it back over to JD, who is sitting by comfortably, hopefully enjoying a Cuban coffee right now.
Well, Miranda, thank you very much. Speaking of Cuban coffee, this is where we can break the story. This is the historic place for Mike Huckabee. You want to tell everybody looking in what happened in this very restaurant a few years ago?
First time I had Cafe Cubano was here at Versailles Restaurant. And, I promise I will not leave this location until I have some.
Good.
That
That's
I
good
promise.
news.
I loved it. You know what?
We're doing the buy-in. We're doing the buy-in.
Well, Raul, everybody kept saying, no, you're probably not going to like this. It's probably going to be too strong. Be careful. You're probably going to be overwhelmed by it. I took it. I said, let me have another one. I loved it. Loved it.
I like Mike.
We all like Mike.
Well, let me ask you, Carlos.
Yeah.
Because we heard Miranda's interview just a second ago with another Cuban American. 2 Cuban Americans in the running. And you said earlier you like Jeb Bush. But this situation for you must be something, just very quickly, it's historic.
Basically speaking, the heritage of being Cuban Americans is very, I feel very proud about it. However, one
And
thing is the
unfortunately,
heritage.
I have to bring up a 4-letter word, time.
Okay.
They're telling me my time is up, but there is more to come here.